We have had some truly elite fantasy football production at the running back position from guys that we would not expect. So it is an honor for me to go through the top 30 running backs for week 3 fantasy football. Starting out with our first tier of guys, I've still got Breece Hall at number 1. He's taking on the New England Patriots on Thursday night, tomorrow night. And listen, with Breece Hall, I know that he's not the running back 1. The two guys that we're about to go through, Saquon and Alvin Kamara, they're obviously averaging more fantasy points on a per-game basis than Breece Hall is up to this point. Now, the only thing that really concerns me with Breece Hall in this matchup versus the Patriots is the fact that he was a little bit in and out of that game, and there was some Braylon Allen obviously involved versus the Tennessee Titans. Now, I haven't seen anything up to this point that would lead me to believe that Breece Hall is missing time, so I'm good with Breece Hall still at number 1. But obviously with Saquon and Kamara, you could make a case to me easily that Saquon and Kamara should be above Breece Hall at this point. I would listen to it, and I would not probably argue too much with it. Because with Saquon Barkley, last week he was like a couple inches away from getting in the end zone against the Atlanta Falcons and possibly could have gotten another touchdown if he had at least caught the ball and not cost the Eagles a freaking ball game. So Saquon Barkley still averaging 24 fantasy points per game, basically. Saquon Barkley's in good shape this week against the New Orleans Saints. And Alvin Kamara obviously just goes completely nuclear in week 2 fantasy football against the Dallas Cowboys. And the good thing is, the reason he can average 31.3 fantasy points per game right now is because when you look back to his week 1 performance, he was really good in that game too. Averaged like 20 fantasy points in that game as well. So Alvin Kamara is here to stay, and I've been saying this for a while. Alvin Kamara has a really safe floor. Now, did I expect him to hit this ceiling game? Not particularly against the Cowboys, but I know the ceiling game is in there because Alvin Kamara usually gives us one of those at least once a year. So I love him against the Eagles this week. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got Etienne and James Cook back-to-back right here. Now, with Etienne, obviously the big question is going to be what is his status with the ankle injury. Now, based on last week's production, you wouldn't think too much of it, right? Because this is obviously a guy who handled like 30 opportunities for the Miami Dolphins last week, with and without Tua. So I don't think that Tua being there necessarily affects Etienne's fantasy production. Like, he showed good without Tua last week. So I don't really get worried about Etienne, and just because he just seems to be matchup proof a little bit right now, based on what the Buffalo Bills did to the Miami Dolphins offense, I'm totally good with Etienne this week at the Seattle Seahawks. And with James Cook versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think it's such a plus matchup. It's ridiculous. And the reality is, James Cook is quickly becoming like a consensus top 5 guy. I mean, he's averaging 20 fantasy points per game practically in a half PPR format, and he has been the number 1 option, not running back, option in this offense with Joe Brady running the play calls since Joe Brady took over. Even last year when they had Stephon Diggs, James Cook became that number 1. And he's being used like it, and he's still freaking efficient. 5 yards a carry, over 12 yards of reception. This dude is getting it done flat out. So against the Jags this week, I'm all in on James Cook right now. And to round out the tier, Josh Jacobs at Tennessee. Now, based on everybody else's fantasy points per game, we go through, it's like, okay, why is he this high? 12.3 fantasy points per game. People who were paying attention last week know how good Josh Jacobs is about to be. Josh Jacobs handled 30-plus carries for the Green Bay Packers last week, which I said a lot during last week. I think it's very possible he does. He came out and he did it, just didn't get the fantasy points to follow, unfortunately. Now, with Josh Jacobs, I don't care about that necessarily. Obviously, it matters because that's what we're playing fantasy, but we're also in a situation here when we talk about Josh Jacobs, that touchdown is just waiting to happen. And based on the fact that Marshawn Lloyd just got put on IR, he was never a threat anyways. Josh Jacobs monopolized the backfield once again at the Tennessee Titans this week. And it could be his first touchdown game. And speaking of certainties, there is a certainty Underdog is providing this week with Aaron Rodgers getting half a yard in this matchup on Thursday night versus the New England Patriots. So obviously this is a great free pick to take advantage of it. If you have not done it yet, sign up for Underdog using that link in the comments below. And when you use code FFN to sign up and deposit at least $10, they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash, and you'll be able to take advantage of this free line. So go down in the comments, use code FN to sign up for Underdog. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, we've still got lots of upside at the running back position with Bijan Robinson, J.K. Dobbins, and Jordan Mason. Bijan Robinson versus the Kansas City Chiefs may feel a little bit high for some, and I'm okay with that because it's very similar to Josh Jacobs for me, where when you look at the workload of Bijan Robinson, it is absolutely worthy of a top 5, top 6, top 10 ranking in fantasy football. He just hasn't gotten in the end zone yet. And that is going to come because this offense is running through him. He's getting more than 20 opportunities on a per game basis through the first 2 weeks. It just hasn't happened yet, but he's still efficient. 5.2 yards per carry and is averaging almost 9 yards per reception. Bijan Robinson is going to get in the end zone, and against the Chiefs this week, may or may not happen, but based on workload, I still want a guy like this. Now with J.K. Dobbins, you can argue with me that he should be above Bijan because J.K. doesn't, the difference is that J.K. doesn't have the monopoly on the backfield. As good as J.K. has been, and this is a guy, I'm so happy to see him doing well. Honestly, like I love seeing J.K. be this good because I was so big on J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State, and his career has been ravaged by injuries. Dude looks extremely explosive this year. It looks fantastic. He's averaging almost 10 yards per carry. That is absolutely outrageous. That's like Etienne last year for the basically the whole duration of the season. Now again, with J.K. Dobbins, the one difference here is he's not monopolizing the backfield. Maybe that's a good thing. I mean, this dude handled majority of the work last week for the Los Angeles Chargers, as I thought it would kind of go. But Gus Edwards is still getting involved. Like, he still had 13 carries last week. So I think that Gus Edwards being there actually helps him. Now, against the Steelers, the matchup is tougher. That's why he's behind Bijan this week. Jordan Mason at 9 at the Los Angeles Rams, I think is a pretty great matchup. And the good thing with Jordan Mason is that he is in a situation where he is not in J.K. Dobbins' position. He monopolizes the backfield. Jordan Mason through 2 games, averaging 24 carries per game. 24. That's on pace with Josh Jacobs. That's ridiculous volume right there for Jordan Mason. Now, the one thing he's not getting that McCaffrey did get is the targets. He's only gotten 1 target per game through 2 games, but he's still averaging 19.3 fantasy points per game and had another strong performance last week, averaging over 5 yards per carry because this offensive line knows how to run the freaking ball. They are a great run blocking offensive line. So I've got really no concerns this week with Jordan Mason at the Los Angeles Rams. The one thing I just wish he could get is some more targets. Maybe we'll see that, maybe we won't. But until we see it, I've got him back here at 9. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here. Still a good amount of upside. Still a really good amount. Jahmyr Gibbs at 10, James Conner at 11. Jahmyr Gibbs at Arizona and James Conner in the same matchup. I think that Jahmyr Gibbs is just kind of, it reminds me a lot of last year. Like with Jahmyr Gibbs, the situation with him last year to start the year was way worse than this, and people were getting frustrated. People are getting frustrated with him again this year because he was a first-round pick in a lot of formats. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs has not been bad for fantasy. Make that clear. He's averaging almost 15 fantasy points per game at the running back position in a half PPR format. That's nothing to scoff at. He's averaging 5.2 yards per carry. Very important metric right there because he's still a very efficient guy. He's averaging almost 7 targets per game. That's why I can't rank him lower than this, because when you look at the opportunities, if you combine the targets and the rushes, this guy is getting almost 20 opportunities per game. And he's obviously the bigger play threat in that Detroit offense. So against the Arizona Cardinals this week, I like his chances of hitting a big game. It's going to happen at some point, and I definitely don't want him lower than this when it does happen. With James Conner, he looks great. I mean, literally, he looks fantastic. 18.4 fantasy points per game through 2 weeks, and he's averaging almost 19 carries per game. He is the clear running back 1. There is no such thing as Trey Benson, who I like a lot, but there's no such thing as Trey Benson right now in this Arizona offense. It is James Conner's season in Arizona right now. So I'm in love with James Conner in fantasy this year. I think that this matchup against Detroit is very, very beatable. Detroit has been pretty solid against the run the first 2 weeks, but they really haven't taken on anybody like James. So I really don't have concerns with James Cook at this ranking right now. Now, dropping down to Jonathan Taylor at number 12 here, and Zach Charbonnet at 13. Jonathan Taylor is a little bit worrisome for me right now. And first of all, he's taking on the Chicago Bears this week. That's a tough matchup right there out of the gate. The other problem I'm having with Jonathan Taylor is not even just like about him as a player. If you look at him as a player, this dude is crushing it on every touch that he gets. 5.4 yards per carry. That's what he's doing right now. There's two problems with him right now, though. This offense is not looking very good. Anthony Richardson just does not look like a very good player, and they're not giving the ball enough to Jonathan Taylor. They're just not. Now, I'm not even talking about targets. Like, I knew coming into the year, Jonathan Taylor wasn't going to get targets with Anthony Richardson, a rushing quarterback. That doesn't surprise me at all. What surprises me is 14 carries. That number needs to go up, or we can't have Jonathan Taylor above this area right now. Now, Zach Charbonnet comes out, has a really good game against New England Patriots. I'm happy for the dude. He looks really good in that game. This week against the Miami Dolphins, matchup looks great. And with Kenneth Walker, I haven't heard too much as of the time of this filming. What I did see, the one report I did see, is that he looks unlikely to play as of right now. So if Zach Charbonnet monopolizes the backfield again, that's going to be his job. And Miami's defense is definitely beatable. James Cook just ripped them apart. Now, Zach Charbonnet is not the player that James Cook is, but if he can get 4 targets again this week, I think Zach Charbonnet is in really good position to be a good fantasy back again this week. Now, David Montgomery rounds out this tier at 14, and he's obviously in that Detroit-Arizona matchup here in Arizona. Now, the thing about David Montgomery is people are so happy with him as opposed to Jahmyr Gibbs, because Montgomery was like a 7th round pick. Like, that's the difference why people are so happy with Gibbs, so unhappy with Gibbs versus being happy with Montgomery. Montgomery was a lot cheaper in drafts, and I was a big proponent for drafting Montgomery. He's obviously been great. 15.4 fantasy points per game. It's very similar to last year. I mean, that's why I liked him this year, because both games he scored a rushing touchdown because he handles the goal line work. You can pretty much count on that continuing to be the case. In Arizona this week, I don't see an issue of why this would change, so I feel really good having him here at 14. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got Brian Robinson Jr. at 15 and Derrick Henry at 16. Now, Brian Robinson Jr., I keep beating the drum on this one. I've kind of been a Brian Robinson drum beater for a lot of, like, the last several months. Like, I've been big on Brian Robinson Jr., and it feels weird because I never really liked the player before this year, but this year he's been pretty good. Last week he had another really good week, and I said it all offseason. This dude is going to be more efficient this year with Jaden Daniels. And this is exactly what's happening. He's averaging 6 yards per carry through the first 2 games. 15.3 fantasy points per game. And the good thing is, he's actually getting more targets per game than I thought he would have. So 3.5 targets per game. Eckler is involved in that passing game. He's actually the leading receiver in Washington, by the way. But Brian Robinson Jr. this week, I think, is just another smash play against Cincinnati's bad defense. Derrick Henry at 16 at Dallas. Listen, Derrick Henry is kind of being saved on a weekly basis by rushing touchdowns. Now, I don't necessarily think they're going to go away. I think it's similar to a Dave Montgomery thing where you can kind of count on rushing attempts at the goal line every week for Derrick Henry because they're a good enough offense to get you down there. And Derrick Henry's obviously so freaking massive and he's so built for that he's going to get in the end zone 9 times out of 10. So it's not that I'm like worried about the lack of volume at the goal line all of a sudden. What worries me is that's kind of what we're relying on. Like, this guy is not averaging more than 16 carries per game. He's obviously not inefficient, but this offensive line is holding him back for sure. So this week against the Cowboys, a mad defense, a better defensive line. Obviously, they got ripped up by Kamara, but Henry here, he worries me. He worries me for sure. There's any week now that he doesn't get a touchdown and disappoints in fantasy and drops that number from 13.4 probably to a lower number than like 10. So just a little bit worried on Derrick Henry. And at 17 and 18, rounding out this tier, Tony Pollard and Kyren Williams at 17 and 18. Tony Pollard taking on the Packers this week at home, and Tony Pollard has been great. Tony Pollard's been really good in fantasy. Like, honestly, I would not argue with you if you put Tony Pollard above Derrick Henry. Might argue with you a little bit on Brian Robinson Jr. But Tony Pollard above Derrick Henry makes sense to me. This dude is more efficient right now. He's averaging more attempts per game. He's averaging, obviously, way more targets per game. And that's really the thing that's kind of separating Pollard right now is the fact that he's getting targets. 5 targets per game. And Tyjae Spears went down with an injury. Don't know his status as of yet. But Tony Pollard looks like the guy in that backfield, no questions asked. So this week against a weaker Packers defense, I like his opportunity. And then Kyren Williams versus San Francisco, this one's obviously going to be contested. I know people will contest this one because there's one train of thought, right? Where it's like Kyren Williams this week, for the next several weeks, going to be really good in fantasy because they're going to have to rely on him. So we're probably going to see his volume go up a significant amount, probably closer to 20 carries per game or something like that. I can understand that for sure. I'll counter that argument with this argument, though. Kyren Williams, this offense is crumbling before our eyes. And it's not just a lack of weapons. That's not the only problem. This offensive line is not good. So they're helping Kyren Williams average 2.5 yards per carry. That's bad. So, I don't think that gets fixed all of a sudden because there's no Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. That doesn't get fixed. They're stacking the box now. These defenses will stack the box against Kyren. So I'm worried about Kyren Williams right now. I think he was a good sell-high candidate this week, and he's taking on the 49ers this week, and that matchup I don't particularly love. Now, dropping down to our next tier right here, I've got Joe Mixon at 19 and Ramondre Stevenson at 20. He's rising up for me. Joe Mixon obviously depends on if he's healthy or not. Joe Mixon got injured on a hip drop tackle on Sunday night, and his ankle, he ended up coming back into that game. From what I've heard and what I know about ankle injuries, because I've sprained a lot of ankles myself, is they start to swell up after a day, right? So I don't know how Joe Mixon is feeling right now. We'll get a better feel for what he does in practice later on today. But Joe Mixon obviously has been really good. Before he went down against the Bears, he was looking pretty good as well. So Joe Mixon, I do think that he's going to turn out to be good this week if he plays. But that's obviously the question, does he play? And if he does play, how much is he going to be limited in that offense? Against the Vikings this week, that matchup scares me a little bit. All that baked together puts him down at 19 for me. Ramondre Stevenson at the Jets on Thursday night. Listen, Ramondre Stevenson has been nothing but good. I mean, he's averaging 18 fantasy points per game. There's something about it I just can't wrap my arms around. And that's because of the fact that Ramondre Stevenson is just in a, I still believe, bad offense. I guess we'll find out if I'm the village idiot or not after this week because the Jets have been ravaged on the ground. They've been ravaged both weeks through the ground. So, Ramondre theoretically should be in line for a really good game. I'm just kind of banking on a worse performance, I guess, but Ramondre has looked really good thus far, so I might be the village idiot in discussing him on what I got right and wrong on Monday night. Travis Etienne at 21 and Aaron Jones at 22. Look, with Travis Etienne, my offseason fears have really come to fruition. Now, a lot of my offseason fears with Travis Etienne were related to Tank Bigsby being more involved. Now, obviously, he goes down with a shoulder injury, does not return in last week's game. I don't know what his status is either. I can't find an update on Tank Bigsby as of the time of this filming. Now, with Travis Etienne, there's another issue here. He's just not looked very good. 3.8 yards per carry on only 12 and a half opportunities per game. That's not good enough. I mean, that's just bad numbers right there. Both games, what saved his week is a touchdown. So Travis Etienne, big time worry for me. Now, I guess based on necessity, if Tank Bigsby misses, then Travis Etienne should be in line for a good fantasy week. But against the Bills, this is not a high ceiling player anymore. You have to readjust your thoughts on Travis Etienne because that ceiling from last year, it's not there anymore. And Aaron Jones at 22 versus the Houston Texans. The one good thing about Aaron Jones last week in a worse week was that his target opportunities were still there. Aaron Jones still was very relevant with targets this week, and I think that nothing changes against the Houston Texans. Even if Ty Chandler were to theoretically lead the backfield this week, Aaron Jones is still going to be in on third downs, and he's still going to be getting opportunities through the air. And Aaron Jones, we saw week one, still a very explosive player to the point where we can get some fantasy production out of him. Now, he's not Alvin Kamara, that's for sure. But Aaron Jones at this point, I still think is a good fantasy option in some situations, like in some flex situations. But against the Houston Texans this week, not exactly a plus matchup. Now, dropping down to our next tier, it's uncertain area. I've got Carson Steele at 23. Rashad White at 24. Carson Steele, obviously a massive waiver wire pickup this week for the Kansas City Chiefs because unfortunately, sucks to say, Isaiah Pacheco is going to miss the next 2 months at least. So Carson Steele, this dude is a rookie fullback. Yeah, you heard that right, fullback. So I don't know how likely it is that he's going to monopolize the backfield. Add on top of the fact that they just added Kareem Hunt back to this squad since like 2018 when they cut him. And listen, they added Kareem Hunt to the practice squad. So that needs to be addressed for certain right here. So I don't think that he's going to be involved this week at the very least. But what I will say is Carson Steele this week, if he handles the work, I want a Chiefs running back. Period, end of story. I want a Chiefs running back. So I'm willing to roll the dice on this one against the Atlanta Falcons, who Saquon did pretty good against. And I think that Carson Steele could have a very good game if he gets the backfield. But I'm willing to roll the dice on this one. Rashad White at 24. Listen, this one's got red flags written all over for me. This one is not looking good. Rashad White, not only is he injured right now. Now, reports are saying that he's going to be fine. It was just like a groin deal, but apparently he's going to be okay. The Denver Broncos, number one, is not the easiest matchup. Number two, just look at his numbers on the screen. He's averaging 2 yards a carry. 2 yards a carry. Now, Rashad White, if you've been with my channel for more than a year, you'll know my big gripe with Rashad White is inefficiency. This dude has never averaged more than 4 yards a carry. Now, the problem that he has right now is they have a running back who is averaging more than 4 yards a carry. Bucky Irving. He's nipping at his heels right now. So I've got red flags written all over this one. Based on target share and based on volume still, I'm going to put Rashad White here, but I'm telling you, he's on notice for me right now. And not just for me, I think he's on notice for the Bucs. Now, 25 and 26 and 27. Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, Najee Harris. Now, with Devin Singletary at the Browns this week, look, he came back, had a pretty good game. Last week against the Commanders, looked pretty decent. Now he's averaging 10.6 fantasy points per game. Reality is, lower ceiling for this guy. So this week versus the Cleveland Browns, I don't see this as a particularly strong matchup. I think the volume is definitely there for him. He's definitely their lead guy, but I'm not feeling very good about Devin Singletary to this point. And then Zach Moss, look, Zach Moss has the opportunity. I mean, versus the Washington Commanders this week, the opportunity is there. But Zach Moss, the problem is that nothing is really broken out. Like, he's the number one by far in Cincinnati, but there just has not been a breakout game. He's getting saved by some touchdowns, but Zach Moss, I want more, and I think that this week, he's got decent upside because it is the Commanders, but based on what he's done the last 2 weeks, can't really put him much higher. And Najee Harris, look, he's leading the backfield. I mean, he is leading the backfield, but this offense just isn't providing him much. I mean, that's the problem with Najee Harris. So I just think that Najee Harris is in a situation where you can't really trust Najee on a week-to-week basis, even though this week, like, he's obviously taking on a tough matchup too. Even though he's still the number one running back in Pittsburgh, even with Jalen Warren more integrated last week, this offense just does not provide much upside. And that's the reality with Najee. Now, rounding out our list right here, at our next tier, Jerome Ford, Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard, back inside the top 30. Jerome Ford is a problem. I'm feeling very similar to Rashad White, except not as bad, because the difference between Rashad White and Jerome Ford is on less opportunities. Jerome Ford was extremely efficient last week. So I feel pretty good today about Jerome Ford rather than Rashad White. Now, the question obviously is, how much volume does Ford get this week? Against the New York Giants, I like the matchup, but I'm worried about Deontay Foreman's involvement moving forward. So I'm not really confident on Jerome Ford right now, but I will say, obviously, the efficiency was there. Now, with Rico Dowdle, he did come through and have more opportunities than Zeke last week. How much of that does that keep up? I want to say that it keeps up because he does look more explosive at this point than Zeke does. But Rico Dowdle still needs to up that efficiency, and the opportunities need to get more. So this week against the Baltimore Ravens, don't really love the matchup particularly, but the opportunity might be there again. Chuba Hubbard, the opportunity is there. Like, that's all I can really say. It's not good a situation. I will say last week, I was actually relatively happy because he did come out. He was really the Panthers' lone bright spot last week. Like, he averaged more than 6 yards per carry last week and upped his yards per carry total right here. So hopefully Andy Dalton provides some spark because I've got Chuba Hubbard in so many best ball leagues. But Chuba Hubbard right now on the Panthers offense, I really cannot project much against the Las Vegas Raiders defense this week. Now, as I like to do at the end of every single week, I like to give you my favorite underdog running back pick of the week, specifically tailored for people who are playing best ball drafts on underdog on a weekly basis. So this week, I actually feel really good about this one. Bucky Irving. I was just talking about my issues with Rashad White. I don't have Bucky Irving inside of the top 30 because I do see, what are the workload concerns here. But this week against the Denver Broncos, I think Bucky Irving may be able to take advantage and come out on top of this running back battle. Bucky Irving has been way more efficient than Rashad White. He is absolutely crushing Rashad White on efficiency, and he is not a bad pass catcher either. So I don't think it's impossible that Bucky Irving out-touches Rashad White if he plays, and if he doesn't play, Bucky Irving's a good underdog pick this week. So let me know how your team is looking so far this week, and if you want to see the top 12 defense rankings for week 3, click on this video right here.